right, thank you for coming this morning. It's great to see such a big turnout. Obviously, this is an issue that's impacting many growers across the island, or at least has your interest because of the way that it's been spreading. This morning, I'm going to continue on from Brian's presentation and take it down more to our local area and talk about the wireworm that we're seeing in PEI and the click beetles as well. So really, there's two surveys that I'm going to go over this morning. Many of you will be familiar with the click beetle study that we did in 2009 and 2012, so I'm going to review that. Some of you have heard those results before and have some more information to show you there. And as well, we did a grower survey prior to Christmas, and going to discuss some of the results we have from that as well. So with the click beetle survey, really the purpose of the survey there, back in 2009, we knew that there was a problem. You know, we were seeing that there was an increased concern, increased damage occurring, and we wanted to kind of get a handle on the information as to what species we might be dealing with and where they were present. So we wanted just to collect that baseline information and see what we got. And we started with the click beetles because, you know, where there's click beetles, there's potential for wireworms as well. And then in 2012, you know, our typical 3-year rotations, 3 years later, we went back into some of the same fields and more so, really to determine if that population had changed and if it was spreading. So back in 2009, we worked, the Department of Agriculture worked with Dr. Nerona's lab, and we identified 60 fields across the island in which we set up these Vernon beetle traps. And this is the trap here. And so essentially, it looks like a little box here, and this is the pheromone. And the pheromone attracts the males because that's the, you know, the scent that the female would put out to attract the males for breeding. So it attracts the males to the trap, and these ramps go in them, and they crawl up into this ramp and get trapped in the trap, and then we would collect them and identify them. Now, we know that in the past, they tend to emerge here beginning, you know, late May, so we made sure that we had the traps out in time for that, and we collected them every 7 to 14 days for about a month, because that's the peak of their emergence, and then they tend to die off after that. Okay, so this is what the trap looks like in the ground. It's level with the ground, so that's easy for them to be able to get in. And so once it's in a field, we put it along the edges of the field and made sure we had it well marked so that we could go back and find it. Now, we did decide to bait for the 3 species, the Lineatus, the Obscurus, and the Spitatter, and so we spaced 3 of these traps along each field, about 100 feet apart. So this is just another photo there of that collection day with the 3 different vials. And we GPSed every one of our points so that we could make sure we could go back to the right spot if we were to do this again. Okay, and when we empty the traps, this might be an example of what you would find. And you see there's all kind of critters that may get in there, like some of these carabids, there's millipedes, but really what we're looking for is this little guy up here is a click beetle, so we'd get rid of the trash and bring in all the click beetles for identification in Dr. Nerona's lab. So what changed in 2012 was that we increased the number of field sites, and as well, we were starting to hear through some of our colleagues at the Horticulture Association that they were seeing, because they had been doing monitoring as well, they were seeing them emerge earlier. So we decided this time to make sure we had the traps out essentially the first week of May. We established those traps. And we collected them every 7 days, and instead of just collecting them until what we thought was the end of their cycle, we collected the traps until we stopped seeing a significant population in those traps and gradually took them out over time. And with that, we did have 1 trap that we ended up collecting right until the very end of July. Okay, so this is a map of the island. And if you see there's brown patches here, this is a layer that is all the agricultural land in PEI. And so we tried to make sure we had good representation across the island. So in 2009, you know, we targeted potato land. And so you'll see there's the bulk of our traps were in Queens County, kind of in that potato belt, but we made sure we had some traps up west as well as in the east. So when we went back in 2012, the growers that we had worked with previously were very accommodating, and we were able to get back into the majority of those fields, if not necessarily in that field, then something close by. and we added some more. And you can see we added, more sites to Prince County there because we had only had a few the years before, and added some more concentration, and again, a few more in the east as well. Okay, so as Brian mentioned, the species that we tended to find after Dr. Norona's lab did all the identification here was those European species, right? The spitatter was the most popular, I suppose, obscurus and lineatus. We did find some of these native species as well, but for the most part, the species that we're dealing with seem to be these European species. So at this point, I'm presenting Christine's data. She is the one who did it. Her lab did the identification and did all the processing of the results. And some of you may have seen this before, but it's never too many times that you can really see this information. My eyes aren't so good. Just a second. Okay, so what we have here, we've got this broke up into three different maps here. This is the western end of the island, and up top you'll see the numbers for 2009, and in the bottom 2012 with those 3 species as well as native species. You'll see up in the western tip here of PEI, in 2009 we only had the 2 sites, and then we increased that to 10. And despite that, although we did see 1 spitatter, there was none in the years previous. We are seeing 1 and some native species. There really wasn't a big change there. Lower down in eastern Prince County, I guess, we had 6 sites in 2009, and we increased that to 9. Again, we didn't have any identified as far as the spitatter were concerned, and the biggest increase really was in the native species, but there still was an increase in the number of spitatter being seen. When we look in the central island, that's where we really get the population explosion, and that's where the biggest concern has been. In 2009, you can see, we have 11 sites, 8 sites, 7 sites, and 4 sites. And we did increase a few of those in each one, 15, 5, 9, and 8. But what I want you to really look at is the explosion in the number of the spitatters. In 2009, up in this quadrant here, we only had 89 spitatters identified in that month. When we got down into 2012, only 3 years later, right? 3 years later, the population is now at 1,254 that we were able to identify and capture at the time. And, realize that we did increase them a bit, and we were looking at a slightly longer period, but that's still significantly more. And as well, we're only looking at the males here, too. We're not trapping the females. And then down in this quadrant, you can see again, there was a bit of it did jump. But then again, over in these quadrants here, you'll see a bigger jump, right? Gone from 32 identified in 2009 now up to 1,619, or 124 jumped to 3,891. Those are huge explosions, right? And that's just in the click beetles. In eastern PEI, it's similar. We saw, this is along that southern shore, those were the areas that we had big issues before, kind of through the Ponnell area there, Hazelbrook. Basically, we've seen an explosion again. We saw big numbers in that first year of 1,000, which at the time I remember thinking, holy cow. I remember collecting the traps and you could hear them jumping before you even approached them. Well, now, but in 2012, yes, we've increased the sites, but we've got 4,500 spitatters that we found there. The other thing, I should go back, that I wanted to point out as well. One thing you should notice, we had a big jump in the Agriotis obscurus at one of the farms here, and we're not entirely sure what's happening there, but that is being followed up on by Dr. Norona. And then in Eastern Kings, it's similar to West Prince. There seems to be an increase happening, and it's not at that same rate that's happening in central PEI, but there definitely is an increase happening both in the native species as well as that spitatter, for sure. Okay, so when you look at that, kind of to look at the table form here, the total number of beetles that we're seeing in Prince County has increased, from that 214 to 1,969. And what's concerning too is the size of the populations. You know, in 2009, the number of farms that only had 10 or less identified increased to 2012. But more of concern is the fact that these farms that didn't have any populations, you know, are now having ones that have, you know, between 100 and over 1,000 in their collection time. Same with Queens County. This is a trend across all of them. We're seeing, you know, maybe a decrease in the number of farms that have small populations, but we're seeing an increase in the number of farms that have larger populations of these click beetles. And you can see there's a big jump in the total, you know, the average per trap. It increased almost eightfold from 2009 to 2012 in Prince County. You know, it's about sixfold in Queens County and about 1.2 in Kings County. And again, this is just another way to look at those numbers, looking at the species and the native species. The total number that was captured in 2012 was right there, and the average per trap. So we're definitely seeing an increase in the number of click beetles. What that correlates to as far as wireworm damage, we're unsure, but where there's click beetles, there's likely that there's wireworm not far behind. Okay, so let's look at the grower survey. What we did here, I mean, the idea behind this was really, you know, we've heard lots of talk. We've heard the concerns, we've heard growers talking at meetings about the damage that is happening across the island, and we really wanted to get a better handle on what those levels were, right? So we wanted to gauge the level of incident, and then based on the response that we got from that, follow up with some of those growers and get, you know, better information as to where those problems were happening, what the perceived damage was, and other information along those lines. So it started with an online survey, which happened in November. At the end of November, a link was communicated through the emails of the PEI Potato Board, the Horde Association, as well as the Department of Agriculture. It was advertised through the Federation newsletter and other venues, and we guesstimate that 750 farmers were exposed to that link or given the opportunity to participate in that online survey. That closed on December 20th, and we were able to take those numbers over Christmas and and after Christmas, follow up with some conversations one-on-one between January 17th and the 28th. So this data is fresh off the press. Literally, we just finished developing these maps Friday afternoon. Okay, so with the grower survey, we actually had 155 individual responses. So really that represents about 20% of what we anticipated, you know, could have responded. And the first question we really asked was, obviously, did you experience wireworm damage in the 2013 year? 86 people, or 86 responses, 55% of them indicated that they did experience some form of wireworm damage. So what crops did they see that damage in? Well, they selected where it was, and this is kind of the crops that were listed as experiencing damage and the number of respondents. Of course, you can see the number of potatoes, which is what we expected. There was a lot of potato responses. But, you know, our carrot growers are really being impacted. And I guess really to demonstrate here, it's all crops, right? You know, we have grain crops in there, we have corn, we have cranberry, we have pumpkins. Rutabaga has definitely been on the rise. I know I've been working in fields with other projects where they hadn't experienced damage before, and we are starting to see it now. So when we asked further whether, you know, this damage that they had experienced of those, you know, of those 86, 71 decided to continue on with the questionnaire, and of those 71, 75% of those people said that they experienced worse damage in 2013 than they had seen in previous years. Okay, so of those 71, 63% of them agreed that we could follow up with them, provided their contact information so that we could go through. That's about 54 of those growers. And so we, of those 87% of them were potato growers. So the bulk of our follow-up calls were with potato growers. And we were able to contact 31. The number of phone calls were made. Not always were we able to get someone on the other end of the line, but we were able to contact these people. So the questions that were asked in this follow-up survey was, what community did you experience the damage in? what level of damage did you experience, and when the level of damage was to be defined by trace amounts up to 2% for minor damage, 2% to 10% for moderate damage, and major damage was anything they perceived to be over 10%. As well as when did you first experience this damage in this crop? Okay, so this is the map that was done up by our GIS department based on the responses. What community did you experience damage in? And I'm going to show you this starting with the major damage. Okay, there's where we're seeing the major damage based on our responses. And I want to be specific, these are not specific fields, these are the communities that they're associated with. So it's not necessarily this whole area, could be bigger, could be smaller, but generally these are the areas that we're seeing it in. And as expected, you know, that southern shore, you know, we see some major areas with, and up towards the Summerside area. Some of the growers said that they had major or moderate damage, kind of combination, or a minor major, depending on the fields. And as you'll see, those are just outside those major areas. When we expand that to moderate damage, we're still broadening out from those same communities, just getting a bigger area. Minor moderate damage in those communities, some new areas kind of up along that northern shore. And minor damage. As you can see, the minor damage is happening all across the island. Now, something that I thought was interesting to look at is when did we start seeing this damage? Now, I don't know how well you can see it. Hopefully you can see it a bit. I've left kind of a transparency there on those major fields, major damage fields. That's all the ones in red. But when we start looking, sorry about the numbers, when we start looking at where the damage was seen, so 2000 is when we start seeing the damage. Follow it up in 2001, we're still in that same kind of southern area, which is where we've known for years that there's been concerns. There's a bit of a jump to 2005, and then it continues to build. 2006, right, so expanding out from those areas. 2007, again, more expansion outside of those areas. 2008, moving out. 2009, you can see them here and here. That's when we did our click beetle survey. 2010, and I think this is particularly interesting, is that those areas where we're seeing major damage up towards the Summerside area, it was only in 2010 that was first identified that there was a wireworm issue happening there. 2011, 2012, which is when we did our next survey, and 2013. You'll notice in 2013, whether it's education and we're becoming more aware of what wireworm damage looks like, or whether this is actually happening and exploding, it still needs to be determined. But the idea here really is to see that as of 2013, we are definitely seeing wireworm damage across the island. Some of the questions that were also asked was what management strategies are being implemented on the farm to help deal with this. Now, of course, because the 29 of the 31 respondents were potato growers, it was geared towards that. Of those using Thymit, there was 48% that are currently using Thymit as part of their control strategy. The most popular rotation, as you know, we would expect for PEI, is that potato grain underseeded forage. Although the people that were experiencing the most damage that were discussed with are starting to substitute out that forage. And some of the options that they're looking at are this brown mustard. We've heard of the management strategies that Dr. Nerona has been looking at with brown mustard. And of the respondents, 32% said they have used or will be using in the next year brown mustard as part of their strategy. So I really want to say thank you to the potato board. The potato board was the one who did up a lot of the data here and did up all the follow-up telephone calls. We really appreciate the time and effort on that, and the Department of Agriculture for working with them. And that's it for me. Thank you. Oh.
Shauna, on those sites that you did the sampling, how many of those sites would have been next to fields that had been using Thymit?
I don't know, to be, you mean for the click beetle survey or
Well,
for
I'm
the?
just wondering if the click beetle is expanding even with the use of diamond.
I don't think that's something we've looked at this point, actually, and that's something we should probably explore.
Thanks very much, Shauna.